in the quiet town of Pripyat, northern Ukraine. Spring of 1986 seemed like any other. The trees along the streets were beginning to bloom, carrying the scent of renewal into the air. Children played in schoolyards, laughter bouncing between the concrete apartment buildings that housed the workers of the nearby Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant. The plant, a modern marvel of Soviet engineering, stood like a colossus over the landscape, its massive cooling towers belching faint plumes of steam into the dawn sky. At reactor number 4, a team of engineers were preparing for a safety test designed to determine how the turbine would respond during a power outage. On paper, the test was simple, a routine procedure meant to ensure the reactor's cooling pumps could function in case of emergency. But the night held a deadly combination of flawed design, human error, and bureaucratic pressure that would soon converge into one of the greatest technological disasters in history. The RBMK reactor, a Soviet innovation, had an inherent flaw. Under certain low-power conditions, it could become dangerously unstable. Operators were aware of the potential risks, but had been reassured by decades of successful operation and the rigid faith in Soviet engineering. As the test began, operators gradually reduced the reactor's power output. A sudden, unexpected drop in power caused panic. In a desperate attempt to stabilize the reactor, engineers withdrew too many control rods, critical instruments designed to absorb neutrons and regulate the chain reaction. Then, at precisely 1:23 a.m. on April 26, a catastrophic surge in energy caused the reactor core to explode. A blinding flash of light erupted, followed by a deafening roar that shook the building and sent radioactive debris into the night sky. The explosion destroyed the roof of reactor number 4, exposing the core to the atmosphere, while fires ignited throughout the structure. Flames licked the shattered walls as a radioactive plume began its silent, invisible journey over Ukraine and beyond. Inside the plant, alarms blared incessantly. Radiation meters maxed out immediately, and smoke filled the control rooms. Operators, shocked and disoriented, scrambled to follow emergency protocols that had never been tested in such extreme conditions. The reactor was no longer under human control. It had become a raging furnace of radioactive material threatening to poison the entire region. Outside the plant, firefighters and plant engineers rushed to contain the inferno, unaware of the lethal radiation. Many received fatal doses within minutes, their skin burned and hair falling out as they fought a fire no water could truly extinguish. These men were the first victims, their bravery condemning them to slow, agonizing deaths. Within hours, their numbers began to swell as acute radiation syndrome claimed more lives. Residents of Pripyat were initially unaware of the disaster. They saw a strange, bright glow in the sky, followed by an acrid smell that caused coughing and nausea. People went about their morning routines, completely oblivious to the invisible threat drifting through their city. By mid-morning, symptoms began to manifest. Children became dizzy, elderly residents collapsed, and confusion spread. It was only when authorities started monitoring radiation levels that the horrifying truth emerged. By the afternoon of April 27th, the Soviet government issued an evacuation order for Pripyat. Nearly 49,000 residents were relocated to temporary housing in nearby towns, leaving behind homes, schools, and workplaces. Many carried only the belongings they could grab in a hurry, unaware that the city they loved would never be safe to return to. The evacuation was conducted with alarming calm, a calculated effort to prevent public panic. Yet the terror had already taken root. As the crisis unfolded, the world began to hear of the liquidators, firefighters, plant workers, engineers, soldiers, and volunteers tasked with containing the disaster. These men, knowingly exposing themselves to lethal doses of radiation, worked tirelessly to prevent further explosions and a potential chain reaction that could have engulfed the entire region. Firefighters like Vladimir Pripyat ran repeatedly into the burning reactor building to rescue trapped workers, fully aware of the deadly consequences. Engineer Alexander Akimov stayed at his post, manually controlling systems to stabilize the reactor as long as he could. Thousands of other workers dug trenches, cleared radioactive debris, and sprayed water onto molten radioactive graphite, often without adequate protective gear. Many of these individuals died within weeks, Those who survived were haunted for the rest of their lives by radiation-induced illnesses. The liquidators' efforts were monumental. They constructed the sarcophagus, a massive concrete and steel structure to contain the irradiated core, working in extreme conditions for long shifts. Helicopters flew over the reactor, dropping sand, boron, and lead to smother the fire, each flight exposing pilots to dangerous radiation levels. Their bravery prevented the disaster from spreading further, but it came at an immense human cost. The radioactive plume released from reactor number 4 drifted silently across Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and beyond. Cesium-137, iodine-131, and strontium-90, hazardous isotopes with long half-lives, contaminated farmland, water sources, and cities. Radiation alarms in Sweden and other parts of Europe triggered international concern. The Soviet Union's initial attempt to conceal the disaster only exacerbated global fear. Locally, the contamination was devastating. Crops failed, livestock perished, and forests turned into lifeless wastelands. Rivers carried radioactive particles downstream, poisoning communities far from the reactor. Residents faced invisible enemies, radioactive particles clinging to clothing, dust in the air, water in the wells. The psychological toll was immense, with panic, fear, and uncertainty gripping communities. The human cost of Chernobyl is staggering. Thousands of cases of thyroid cancer, especially among children, are linked to iodine-131 exposure. Acute radiation syndrome killed dozens of plant workers and firefighters within weeks, while long-term exposure contributed to cancers, immune disorders, and birth defects. Survivors experienced chronic fatigue, neurological disorders, and psychological trauma. Families were separated, and communities uprooted, leaving emotional scars as enduring as the physical ones. The environmental consequences of Chernobyl continue to unfold decades later. Soil remains contaminated, forests are riddled with dead zones, and rivers carry residual radiation. Wildlife has been affected in unpredictable ways, with mutations observed in plants, insects, and animals. Yet, in the absence of humans, nature has slowly reclaimed parts of the exclusion zone. Wolves, deer, and birds thrive in abandoned cities, creating a paradoxical sanctuary amidst the radioactive wasteland. Forests surrounding the reactor became the infamous Red Forest, where pine trees turned reddish-brown and died within weeks of the explosion. The soil there is some of the most radioactive on the planet, and even brief exposure can be lethal. Researchers studying the zone continue to find isotopes that persist decades after the disaster, a chilling reminder of humanity's vulnerability. The disaster also left deep social scars. Families were displaced permanently. Generations grew up in fear of invisible radiation. The economic cost was staggering, with billions spent on evacuation, cleanup, medical care, and containment structures. Cities like Pripyat became ghost towns, monuments to human error and resilience alike. Chernobyl remains the most significant nuclear accident in history. It revealed the dangers of flawed reactor designs, the catastrophic consequences of human error, and the high stakes of bureaucratic secrecy. The disaster prompted sweeping reforms in nuclear safety worldwide, including better reactor designs, international oversight, and transparent reporting protocols. It also highlighted human courage and sacrifice. The liquidators, engineers, firefighters, and volunteers put their lives on the line to prevent a far greater catastrophe. Their stories serve as a testament to bravery in the face of invisible and deadly forces. Today, the Chernobyl exclusion zone is both a graveyard and a symbol. Tourists walk through abandoned buildings, schools frozen in midday routines, amusement parks overtaken by weeds, and streets where personal belongings remain untouched. Nature has returned in surprising ways, yet the radioactive threat persists. Chernobyl is a stark reminder that technology carries both power and responsibility. It warns that negligence, hubris, and secrecy can turn human innovation into disaster. And it shows that courage, resilience, and vigilance can mitigate even the greatest of tragedies. The world continues to study, visit, and learn from Chernobyl. Scientists monitor radiation levels, Governments reassess nuclear safety, and storytellers ensure that the legacy of the disaster is never forgotten. From the initial explosion to the ongoing environmental and human consequences, Chernobyl is a story of horror, heroism, and an enduring cautionary tale for generations to come.